just a little context for what we're doing today. My department, my colleagues and I, did a community health needs assessment over the course of last year. We engaged about 1,300 people. We did 56 focus groups, 55 interviews, and got about 750 survey responses to questions about what are the biggest health needs in our communities. This is varying county-wide. The number one issue, from senior centers to high school students, to people who live in private homes, to people who live in public housing, people who are employed, people who are not employed, was mental health. And it was unambiguous. We have an issue in our community around mental health, behavioral health. We see it in our young people, we see it in our senior citizens. So I became exposed to the concept of trauma and its impact on health, mental health, but also physical health. There's strong relationships between what we experience, the traumatic experiences in our life, and chronic disease, as well as mental health challenges, including substance misuse issues. Dr. Quintana and I used to work together in Chicago at the School of Professional Psychology, and I was aware of her work and invited her to come to the community to talk about trauma and the impact of trauma on human behavior and human health. So that is the context for this. I will say that I ran into the superintendent one day, maybe not even 6 weeks ago, shared with her what we were doing, and she said immediately, this is the kind of thing that we'd like to have in the school district. So that's the context for this presentation today, and I think we're at a point where just about 2 o'clock where we can start with Dr. Quintana, who's a clinical and community psychologist at Adler University in Chicago. She never talks enough about what she does. She works with YMCAs, Chicago Public Schools, youth and detention settings. Her work is rooted in issues of violence in Chicago, but morphed into, evolved into this work around adverse childhood experiences and how they impact child behavior. And that's what she's going to talk to you about this afternoon. Elena, do you want to get started? Dr. Quintana, want to get started? You want to, how are you doing for surveys? Are you pretty much done? No. Okay.
We want uninterrupted minutes for surveys, so if we could get most of them collected before I start, that'd be better. Thank you. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. If you still have a survey, if you could pass it in at this point, that would be great. And I'll go ahead and get started. I'm wondering, how many of you here are classroom teachers? A lot of people. Any administrators? Administrators, okay. Are there people that work in the operations of the school? Operations, okay, great. Security? Okay, who did I miss? Prosecutors? Yes? Representing, that's great. Who else? Parental? Bus drivers. How about bus drivers?
Internet.
All right. I would like you to know that not only are you educational professionals, you're also public safety professionals. Yep. I didn't ask about food service. All right, thank you. That's beautiful, thank you. Okay, I really am so touched with everybody who came out, and I'm excited to talk about this. And so why don't I go ahead and get started, and then we'll have a little bit of chance to talk. I want you to keep in mind, just think in your mind of a child that has created a lot of stress in your life. All right? Can you think of 1 or 6 of them? Okay? So I really want you can think of 1 or 2 of the ones that have caused some stress. Maybe they caused stress earlier this week, whatever, right? I want you to think about, do you know anything about their home lives? What do you know about their home lives? Yeah?
Their parents,
Huh?
it's different than mine.
It's different than yours. Do you think that growing up for them is mostly easy or pretty difficult? Pretty difficult. Okay. So most of us know that when people are like acting up and that it's difficult, that hurt people, right? And it's really important to know how difficult, and I just want to be a witness to the fact that working with hurt people is hard, especially when we're hurting too. So when you have too much stress and too few resources in your own life or your profession, or just in a day-to-day moment, it's really hard to have all of the patience for somebody who's really having a hard time a lot of the time, right? And so I wanted to tell you a little bit about a study that I learned about about 5 years ago called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, which really opened my eyes, not only about the science behind what we already know in our hearts, like we know that when people are having a hard time or causing a lot of trouble, it's because their lives are pretty difficult, and that's the truth. The science behind it helps us to understand what to do about it. So I want to talk a little bit about that, all right? So there's this bundle of science called neurosciences, neurobiology, which is brain science, epigenetics, which I'll talk about, which is about how things are passed on from generation to generation, even in your genes. Adverse childhood experiences, which I talked about a little bit, which you took a pre-test about, and resilience. Resilience is like when things bounce back, right? And the Adverse Childhood Experiences study that I talked about was started by these two guys, Vince Folletti and Rob Anda, both medical doctors. And it happened when Vince Folletti ran a clinic in San Diego, California, where a lot of the people that he treated would make big health gains, like they'd lose 300 pounds, they'd stop smoking, they'd stop doing drugs. But then he realized that it was really, really difficult for them to maintain those changes. I mean, have any of you had trouble like keeping off weight? I have, right? It's the holidays, everybody's like, yes. Okay, well, they wanted to know in a huge way, like for people that have serious issues that really have trouble giving them up, why is it so hard? So they started asking all these questions. And they were saying, you know, you lost 150 pounds. Why did you gain back 175? What's happening? And everybody cited this kind of list of things that had happened to them in their childhoods. And they started wondering if maybe that what happened during childhood was the powerful thing that made life difficult for all sorts of people, not just for the people that they talked to in this clinic. And so they did this large study with over 17,000 people in San Diego, California. All of the people belong to Kaiser Permanente. And it's a Kaiser Permanente in San Diego is like Blue Cross Blue Shield here. It's a big insurance agency, but they also have hospitals that are affiliated and stuff like that. Well, anyway, so it's kind of a convenient sample because that's where this study works. And so it's like split down the middle basically around gender. It was mostly white, mostly college educated, and the average age was like 58 years old. So really like older, white, college-educated, middle-class people with insurance. Not exactly the slice of Ben Harbor, right? But I will say that it told a big story, and I'll get to that. What they found is that when they asked all these people, what was it about your childhood that was very difficult? They named 10 things that they started counting, right? That they had experienced before the age of 18. These included physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, or 5 kinds of what they called household difficulties or dysfunction, which would be being raised by somebody who's mentally ill, having somebody in your household that went to prison, seeing your mother or mother figure being treated violently, a substance abuser in the house, or the loss of a parent. Right here it says divorce because that's the biggest reason for loss of a parent, but many people could be born into a home without a second parent, or lost a parent to death, or something else. And what they found, even in this group that they thought probably wouldn't have a lot of difficulty in childhood, what they found was amazing to them. That 2/3 of the study patients had at least one adverse childhood experience. And if you have one, you have an 87% chance more than one. And the more you have, the more difficulty you face in general in life. So let's talk about that. Remember how I said that almost everybody's college educated, middle class, mostly white? Well, there's this other guy named Roy Wade, Dr. Roy Wade, who is a researcher in Philadelphia. He's awesome. And he wanted to learn more about what happened with the younger population. What happened with populations that are mostly people of color. And so he redid the study, asking lots of people in Philadelphia with an average age of 34 rather than 56. And he said, what are the things that set you back? And there were 5 other things that were added to the original ACE study. Like all of the things that people experienced in the first ACE study, they listed in the Philadelphia study. But they also added experiencing racism as very, very traumatic, witnessing violence, living in an unsafe neighborhood, being placed in foster care at some time in your life, and experiencing bullying. These are all things that are so common to so many young people. And then there was the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, which even asked more questions and added more things to the list. So the whole point is, it's not about these 10 magic adverse childhood experiences. It's that when you have traumatic experiences in life, it makes the rest of your life more challenging. I'll talk about that. I mean, the other ones here are things like forced displacement, kidnapping, physical assault, natural disaster, illness or medical trauma, school violence. All of these you can imagine would be equally traumatic as the first things I talked about. They just didn't occur in as high of numbers. So what they found, and I'm going back to the original ACEs study, but I want you to imagine that other kinds of traumatic experiences would cause these similar results. But in the first one, with just the 10 questions, what they found is that these are all different mental illnesses. That mood disorders, if you have 0 adverse childhood experiences, you have many, a much smaller percentage of the population that will have a mood disorder at some time in their life. And it increases by about 3.5 times if you have high ACEs than if you have low. You're about 5 times more likely, 2.5 times more likely to have an anxiety disorder if you have high ACEs than if you have low. You're about almost 5 times more likely to have substance abuse problems if you have high ACEs than if you have low. And also, similarly, about 4.5 times more likely to have an impulse control disorder. So I wasn't exact on my math, but you can see the stair-step pattern. This is 0 ACEs, 1 ACE, 2 ACE, 3 ACE, 4 ACE, and these are all of the different things at the bottom. But it's not just mental health that was affected. It was also chronic physical symptoms, like heart disease, that you're more statistically significantly more likely to have heart disease if you have a lot of stressors and traumatic stress in your life. If you have high and low, you're more likely to suffer a stroke, lung disease, diabetes, and sexually transmitted diseases. That's the one on the end. And what's interesting is, like say for example, you have very high ACEs, like more than 7 ACEs. Somebody with more than 7 ACEs is 5 times more likely to contract HIV than somebody with 0. And so they start seeing these chronic health conditions that are very effective by how much traumatic stress people experience as children. Again, there can also be work-related problems, like how much work people miss. For example, like only 7%, 6 or 7% of people with 0 ACEs had a chronic problem with absenteeism, missing a large amount of work in the last month, versus almost 15%, almost 3 times as much of people with high ACEs. People with high ACEs are more likely to experience financial problems and have overall job problems. So you can kind of see, why is this, right? It's pretty interesting. This is another way of looking at it. I mean, it's one of the big issues that every time I'm in Benton Harbor is that, in Chicago, homicide is an incredibly bad problem. And that's something I've dedicated my life to really addressing. And we have about 20,000 homicides every year in this country, which is so many, right? But we have 30,000 completed suicides. Suicide is an enormous problem. And if you have low ACEs, about 1 in 96 people with no ACEs attempt suicide at some time in their life. About 1 in 10 if you have just 1 to 3 ACEs. And if you have 4 or more ACEs, it's 1 in every 5 people that will attempt suicide at some time in their life. This is amazing in terms of what happens with people, because when we do not deal with stressors well, often the upside that creates these kind of chronic issues for us. This is a kind of oil spill. This was designed in Washington, D.C. after they had an oil spill there. And they have this, you can't really read it very well from where you are. But you can't read it well from where you are, but I'll read some of it. That basically this is population attributable risk. That this has been causally linked. They have been able to show that adverse childhood experiences are the cause of a certain percentage of each of these issues. So 65% of alcoholism can be attributed to adverse childhood experiences. 21% of sleeplessness, 59% of emotional problems, 67% of suicide attempts, 41% of chronic depression, 78% of IV drug use, 61% of incarceration as an adult. It's just a huge issue across the board. And I've seen many, many of these wheels. It is the single study in the United States that has produced more significant results than any other. It's just been an amazing study that we've learned lots and lots about. What they find is that for people who have 6 or more adverse childhood experiences, on average, they die 20 years sooner than people with 0. And so you start to see big disparities, right? So this is a bummer. I'm starting to see people like be sad about this. So I'm going to tell you how to start coming together as a community to address this. But I need to tell you what the issue is in the beginning, all right? There's 3 kinds of levels of stress that people have. There can be positive stress, like, it's my first day on a new job. I have to look good. I want to get there on time. I want to make a good impression. That's positive stress. You get excited about it. You see it as something that is stressful, but it's something that's good in your life. Then there's tolerable stress, which can be a temporary setback, but it's really buffered by supportive relationships. Like maybe, for example, you had a death in the family, and that was something that really set you back for a while. But if you have the kind of help and support that you need, that can be experienced as tolerable stress. Now, toxic stress is a prolonged reaction to stress with not enough protective relationships, right? And I'll give you a picture of what toxic stress looks like. So here's a baby that can be born into the world experiencing lots of things like a lack of money or a single parent home or an inadequate social network, education deficits, lack of health care, family violence, death of a loved one, bad health, no recreation, poor nutrition. How many people in the audience think that these are some things that are common for families in Benton Harbor? Yes. Huge, right? So the issue is not just about all of these things, it's about how do we come together as a community to start addressing people that have toxic stress. Like we see what the outcome of toxic stress is. It's health disparities, it's a lot more depression, mental illness, absenteeism, not being able to attend to school or to work. That's what happens when you have toxic stress. But then what do you do about it? Because like it says here in this one, toxic stress is prolonged activation of stress response systems in the absence of protective relationships. How many people in this whole audience feel that they are somebody who others rely upon regularly? That you play the role of being a protective person in somebody's life? Almost everybody, right? You guys are the answer to addressing adverse childhood experiences and toxic stress. here's the way that it works in childhood. So childhood stress can lead to, have you ever like had, like when you realize like you see the lights go on behind you as you're driving and you know the cops are following you and you feel that spike of adrenaline? You know what I'm talking about? Yes, okay. That's actually a cortisol response, a stress hormone that's trying to help you figure out what to do, right? Fight, flight, freeze, pull over, where's my registration, right? For kids that have lots and lots of stressors, just like the baby I showed you, they can have a chronic sense of being overproducing that cortisol and norepinephrine within their body. Those are very stressful hormones that create changes in their brain architecture to try to help them deal with all of the danger and threat around them, which can lead to being very, very quick to get upset or to anger and very slow to calm down. Anybody know any hotheads? Me too. Right. This is about dealing with stress in your life on a chronic basis. Creates people that have to be ready. And this actually is an adaptation that helps people survive when they grow up around a lot of threat. So here's an example. You know how like people, a lot of times, kids especially, will fight and you think, why did it turn so serious? Like that was the dumbest thing ever, right? Like I don't even know why that happened. Well, this is the amygdala, the 911 center in your brain, and it gets very emotional, right? And so it's attached to the hippocampus, which is your memory center in your brain. For people that have a lot of stimulation to the amygdala, and it's like, for example, you're walking by, crossing the street, and all of a sudden a car comes around the corner, and that car is like coming right for you, and you almost jump out of your skin because you think it's going to hit you, right? That's the amygdala, like trying to tell you, trying to keep you alive. Well, it depends upon your hippocampus, your memory center, drawing upon your experiences of what to do. If you're somebody who has been hit by a car in your life, you're going to be much more nervous than somebody who has never been in that circumstance before, or who maybe, has seen lots of cars come around the corner, but they can see that it's far enough away that nothing bad's going to happen, right? And so what happens for people with lots and lots of trauma is they got caught in this spiral. The prefrontal cortex is like your logic center of your brain, and it's the outermost layer of your brain. But your thoughts, your reactions can never even get to your place where they can reason with what's going on if you're in this kind of trauma cycle of producing lots and lots of cortisol and norepinephrine, and then it goes around and you're getting more and more worked up, right? So say, for example, a kid comes in and somebody bumps into him. For a kid with a lot of trauma, somebody bumping into him can seem like a really intended threat. Whereas for a kid who hasn't had a lot of trauma, they can just kind of brush it off a lot more easily. And so that's why it's so important when kids are in this mode of being very amped up to have the understanding that it's going to be difficult, if not impossible, for them to think rationally in that moment. And that for somebody who has had a lot of trauma, they take a lot longer to calm down than somebody who has not. Does that make sense? So a reaction to that would be understanding that something bad happened and that you give them time to kind of chill out a little bit. There is a school that tried to be completely trauma-informed. And what they did was they had bullseyes all over the school. And it was like red, yellow, green, right? Those are the three. So at the center, the red, it meant that you were still in the middle of feeling very upset. And so say something happened, I bumped into a kid, the kid got really mad at me, we were both mad at each other, we started getting into a fight, the principal or whoever broke it up, and then we had to work it out. Well, we're not gonna be able to work it out right away if we're two kids, especially if we have like a lot of trauma and we're really upset. So what this principal did was to say, okay, I want you to just tell me, if you're in the red, it means you want to talk about this today. If you're in the yellow, it means you can talk about it maybe in an hour or two. And if you're in the green, it means you're ready to talk. And so basically, set up a system so that, you know, when you're ready to talk, the two sides can talk and work it out. But that you're not forcing people to be able to do something that they can't do based on their current state of being worked up. This is a little piece of brain development that not all of the brain develops at the same time. And when you have different things happen to you, different kinds of trauma happen at different ages or stages in your brain development, that it produces different kinds of issues. Like for example, if you experience trauma when your cerebellum is going through a big growth spurt, you're very likely to experience depressive symptoms and mood disorders. If you have issues that happen when your limbic system is developing, that's at the end of junior high and throughout high school, even into the beginning of adulthood, that limbic system is really disrupted, especially by witnessing violence, by experiencing violence, and that's something lots of people go through. And the hallmark of the limbic system disruption is having relationship difficulties, being able to work well with other people and resolve conflicts completely and peacefully. Just for example, I mean, we could spend like a whole time talking about brain. This is two brains of 2 3-year-old children. The one on the left has had a normal childhood, the one on the right experienced extreme neglect. I think this happened in an Eastern European orphanage. But what's very interesting is you can see how much the treatment that people get really does affect brain mass, brain architecture, and brain function. Average childhood experiences in childhood are so powerful. They impair people that have a lot of them can have a lot of developmental problems and that experience a lot of developmental problems, especially in the first 3 years of life, are at greatest risk for experiencing language difficulties, risk for failing a grade. They're most often designated to special ed. They're more often suspended or expelled than other children. They're more likely to have poorer health outcomes. They're at greater risk for incarceration. And they have more difficulty with what's called executive functioning challenges, which have to do with things like planning, waiting, you know, like impulse control disorder, impulse control, and then also things like estimation. There's all sorts of things that are more difficult when you have a lot of average childhood experiences, especially in the first 3 years. This is your average high school in Washington State. What's very interesting about it is they started thinking about what if all of the desks of the kids had the number of average childhood experiences that they did through on the front of their desks. And what they found is that in a classroom of 30 people, that 6 students would have 0 average childhood experiences, 5 would have 1, 6 students would have 2, 3 students would have 3, 7 students would have 4 or 5, and 3 students would have 6 or more. Interestingly, they did a phone survey and they asked all of the adults in Washington State, not all of them, but a lot of them, and they said, how many average childhood experiences do you have? They asked them, and about 26%, just a little over 1/4, 1 of every 4 adults, had 3 or more average childhood experiences. When they asked the same thing of these students, it was 43% that had 3 or more average childhood experiences. That's significantly more than the adults. And so it's really important to think about how much young people are being subjected to in their just daily lives, what they're living through. ACEs affect attention memory, cognition, processing, and organization. Adverse childhood experiences, bad things that kids go through, toxic stress, they're the main reason that kids miss school or get into trouble. And the second highest predictor of academic failure after being in special ed classes. What's so interesting though about this, for me, is that I think that sometimes people say, well, that kid would be good if the parents weren't bad. And I think it's important to think about this intergenerationally. While it's easy to get very frustrated with parents, dealing with adverse childhood experiences is often an intergenerational problem that has never been addressed. So as much as it's easy to just kind of say that mom or that dad or that whoever hasn't done right by the child, and maybe they've even done stuff like become addicted to drugs or disappeared for a period of time, something that feels like not easy to accept, to tolerate, or to understand. But the truth of the matter is, that's just more evidence of intergenerational trauma that can only be addressed if we build a bridge to those people rather than remove them or distance ourselves from them. Does that make sense? People don't look happy about that. But I'm telling you, it's hard and it's true. So there's two ways that average childhood experiences cross from one generation to the next. So here we have on the top, I just picked one kind of average childhood experience, which is child abuse. So say that's at the top. That can lead to aggression, conduct problems, depression, post-traumatic stress, or school problems, which can turn into other problems in adolescence, like greater depression, school dropout, substance abuse, re-victimizing or beating up other people. That's how child abuse can show itself in adolescence. And then in adulthood, that person who was abused as a child can end up having parenting problems, domestic violence, maternal depression, post-traumatic stress, poverty, substance abuse, which may lead to more child abuse. So do you see how easy it is to vilify an adult, but when the adult has never had any kind of meaningful intervention other than to just hear that they're not a good parent? So we have to think about how we create resources for people. I'm not saying it makes sense to leave kids in a bad situation. I'm saying it's important to think about this intergenerationally. There's another way that experiences are passed on from generation to generation, and it's called epigenetics. And it's the theory that what our parents and our grandparents ate, how much exercise they had, what chemicals they were exposed to, what experiences they lived through, that all of those things could factor in the way our bodies look and how they work and how we even think, how we perceive the world. Has anybody heard of epigenetics? Yes. Okay. So I want to talk about one of the studies. It's a cherry blossom study. I'm going to talk about two epigenetic studies here. The cherry blossom study was done in 2013 and found that mice they raised a bunch of mice and raised them in a lab. And so these little mice, they had them smelling different little smells. They're like, chocolate, orange blossoms. Well, they also had them smell cherry blossoms. But when they put in the cherry blossom smell, they would shock the mice, right? And so when they shocked the mice would start pairing the smell with being shocked, right? Like they didn't want to get shocked, right? So then they took away the shock and they would just put in the smells. And they'd be like, chocolate smell, that's great. Orange smell, great. But then when they did the cherry blossom smell, what do you think the mice did? They would shake, they get real scared, right? They'd pile on top of each other and shake. And so then they bred these mice. They stopped exposing them to any kind of smell, any kind of shocking. They just lived their little mice lives. And they bred them. And when they bred them, they took the babies and they put them into another lab and they raised them in another lab. When they exposed these babies, they didn't shock them, they didn't do any of that. But when they got to be adults, they exposed them to cherry blossom scents. And what do you think happened when the babies were exposed to cherry blossom scents? They shook, yes, they got afraid. And people are like, how can you explain that when they never saw any of the mice, their little mice ancestors react or respond to this? And it was because that warning had been passed on in their genes, that they had been giving a warning that would help them stay alive in the world. Okay, one other study. How's everybody doing? Yes, you're okay? All right. All right. Study number 2. You ready? If that one's like the passing on the warning, there's also a couple studies that show how quickly people can change genetically as well. There's one where there were very, very attentive mom rats and pretty inattentive mom rats. Like they were sick of their little rat pups, and they were just kind of like, get out of here, kid, you're bothering me, right? So they had the moms that were like, didn't want to be rat moms, and then they had the rat moms that were real licky and affectionate and stimulated the little rats a lot. And what they found is that the rats that had a lot of affection, that were groomed a lot, that were given a lot of stimulation and attention, that basically they had a much lower level of cortisol. Remember I talked about the hormone cortisol that makes you freak out when you hit stressful situations? They had much less cortisol when something bad would happen. And then also, they had a much better developed memory center. So they were able to remember things much better than the rats that did not have that kind of same stimulation and same affection growing up. So what they found is that even within the same generation, that what happens when you know, how much you are protective, how much you are affectionate, how much attention you give to these young, that it is protective of them and helps build their brain function and their response to the world. How many people think that bus drivers are really important in brain development of young people? I do, right? How we treat children, and especially children that are experiencing a lot of trauma, can make a lot of difference in their lives. So I want to really challenge the idea. It's not nature or nurture. It's not like, you know, you're born this way or you learn everything once you get here. It's really a combination going back and forth where our genes are responding to the experiences we're having and are passing on those codes to our children and our grandchildren to help them live better lives. And the more we can be protective and the more we can try to connect in a positive way with young people, the stronger they will be, and that will be encoded in their genes and their brain development. So here's my thought question. If we can be warned, like they were with the cherry blossom study, and shaped by negative experiences intergenerationally, can we also be healed? What might intentionally fostering intergenerational healing look like? What does that look like? Who's responsible in this room for fostering intergenerational healing of children? That's like not very many hands. All of them, right? Like you all are. You're incredibly powerful. You're more powerful than you know in the lives of young people. So this is the logic model of the average childhood experiences study. They started off like this, where this is perception, and then like negative things happen, then it leads to social, emotional, and cognitive adjustment, where your body and your mind are trying to figure out what's going on, am I being threatened, what do I do? If you have a lot of negative things around you, then it's the adoption of health risk behaviors. And then those adoption of health risk behaviors lead to disease, disability, and social problems, which can lead to early death. Now, what's really important to know is that if you are able to really work with people to understand how to best understand where their issues come from and help them find positive coping strategies, including positive connected relationships, then they are far less likely to experience early death and far more likely to use difficult experiences in life as positive learning experiences that they got through. It goes from a toxic stress level to a tolerable stress level. But there are things that really, I think, are important. And it's called, one is called the historical trauma and the social context that you're born into. So, historical trauma, has anybody heard of historical trauma? I'm going to talk about it a little bit. Okay, so basically, there's lots of examples in our country of historical trauma, and there's lots of ways that we make this happen each and every day. And I think that we need to be really sensitive to it because it's as powerful or even more powerful than average childhood experiences. It creates widespread social conditions that create challenges to many people. So when you experience a loss of a homeland, a way of life, language, culture, the ability to practice your faith, your freedom, your right to raise your children, or access to justice, it leads to all sorts of negative impacts in your life, like grief, internalized depression, and increased cortisol levels that contribute to many, many health and physical and mental issues. Does that make sense? Okay. So there's a Native American scholar named Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart who coined the term historical trauma. And as you can imagine, lots of Native Americans have talked a lot about historical trauma and the ways that it's affected Native American communities across this country. And Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart talked about it as a collective emotional and psychological injury, both over the lifespan and across generations, resulting from a history that occurs as a result of genocide and other significant abuses. I have added to this definition to talk about it as a legacy of systematic marginalization through current enforcement of policies, practices, and laws that recreate trauma. There are lots of laws that we mean to keep social order, but that sometimes end up marginalizing people and punishing people more than other people. And this actually makes whole communities sick, and it creates lots of problems, not only in behavior, but also in physical and mental well-being. So I'll give an example. Well, you guys can give an example. Does anybody think of any example of like historical trauma? Slavery is the biggest one that lots of people talk about, and there are studies even in epigenetics, for people who, in the epigenetic studies in terms of like people who've gone through like starvation, people who've gone through the Holocaust, people who've gone through slavery, and they find these physical markers of people who have lived through very difficult things in their lineage. So, good example, of course, I see that a lot of times what happens, like slavery, when people continue to be oppressed, that it continues to have very devastating effects, and you still see these huge disparities in population. So slavery is a great example, and I like to have people guess. Does anybody know what the country is in the world that sold its people into slavery longer than any other country? It's a single country, sold its people into slavery for 1,000 years. Any guesses? Huh? China? China? No, it wasn't China. It was no African country. Huh? Just a country. Huh? India? Good guess. I'm going to tell you right now. It was Scotland. Who knew that? Scotland. Right. So the Scottish, and then later the Irish, and even their forefathers and mothers, the Albas and the Picts, They sold their citizens into slavery to many different empires, the Roman Empire, the Middle East, the Caribbean, colonial America, for a period of 1,000 years. And what is so interesting is that the legacy of slavery is seen as only an African American legacy, right? And my thought about that is when you afford people access to opportunity, to justice, that healing can occur, right? So my thought is, when healing is not occurring, it's because these conditions are not met. We have practices and policies that continue to create great harm in, for example, African American communities, right? I'll give you an example of one community that was healed, that is healing, but that showed a big bounce when you are able to give people some access to opportunity and justice. And that is the LGBT community. So this is a study that was done in Massachusetts, and there was a psychologist named Mark Hatzenbuehler who wanted to study why there were so many, especially gay bisexual men, that were dying and had a lot of depression as compared to the general population. So there were a lot more suicide, a lot more treatment for mental illness. There was just a lot of stuff going on. So he did a big study about why that was. And in the middle of his 2-year study, Massachusetts, where he was doing the study, and he was comparing over 1,200 gay men to just general population. In the middle of his study, gay marriage was legalized in the state of Massachusetts. He could never have known that this was going to occur. But what happened, and he was shocked to find out, was that medical care visits, mental health care, and mental health care costs significantly decreased for the group of people that he was studying. Because when you afford, like I said, when you afford opportunity and justice, that healing can occur. And this, it doesn't mean that, just getting the right to marry is absolute equality. But even that gesture, that inclusion and that equality, that wellness was able to be attained for more people. They got better. So when you are seeing huge disparities in the way that people are treated, you'll see that there are ongoing health disparities, ongoing conduct disparities, and ongoing poverty. I mean, it's so interesting. And so it's very important for us to think about all of the policies that we create within our education system, within our schools, that really start thinking about how can we help people do better. And I say all of the policies that we have, that they are like a greeting that we give people, right? So the rules, the policies, the laws that we adopt, some of the policies and some of the laws are like, I love you and I'm so happy to see you. And some are like, welcome, friend. And some are like, hi. Others are like, what are you doing here? Or get out of here right now. Or I will willingly work toward your demise. And there's some kind of laughing about it, but it's true. Like I was saying, if I'm getting pulled over by a cop, even though it'll make me nervous, I'm